On this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, we have my good friend, Jonathan Allen Wright. Jonathan is an incredible musician, artist, songwriter, and content creator over on YouTube. We talk about his approach to songwriting, how he tries to not get in his own head, how he is approaching his content over on YouTube with deep diving into weird and strange topics, and a ton more good times. Super thankful for having Jonathan on. Let's get right into the episode. Welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I'm your host, Drew. Not here with my co-host, Josh, but I am here with good friend and I would call him modern Renaissance man himself, oh, no. Jonathan Wright.
What if the camera just swaps over to me and I'm in full Renaissance garb?
Yeah.
You know, it's like a nice puffy sleeved shirt over here.
I say that because you are one of the few people I know that does everything. That does like
Jack maybe of all to trades, master of none.
Maybe yeah. I was gonna say maybe to a fault, but does sure everything.
My wife has multiple times told me, Jonathan, you have too many things you're interested in, and she's right. I'm definitely interested in too much.
She's right.
I find everything fascinating.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, Jonathan, for the people who may not know you, and you've had lots of job changes and all that kind of stuff, but for the people who may not know who you are, why don't you give them the quick overview of who you are and what you do? And I know that's kind of a complicated answer.
I was going to say this answer is going to be, like you said, this is where that Renaissance man becomes a problem because you're like, wait a second, what do I start with? I work full-time now doing video content creation for others and for myself. That is pretty much what I do day to day, but I also love writing and recording music, and I memes. What do I say, Drew? I mean, I've done so many memes as well, and those are the things that I would say are the main focus, is like video and audio music creation, and then somehow trying to marry all of that into a personal brand that is successful. We'll see how it goes.
and making it a living to where your wife doesn't kill you in your sleep.
Exactly. I'm like, sorry, babe, I've got to go outside and shoot a comedy YouTube video real quick.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, babe, I'm making this meme. It's going to crush.
Yeah. You're being a little bit loud right now, Kristen. You're taking this meme very seriously. Could we tone it down some?
Exactly.
I can't go change that diaper. I'm in the middle of shooting a YouTube video. It's the weirdest,
Oh, God. Oh, yeah, and a semi-recent father as well.
That's true. At the time of recording, she is 4 months and 1 week old. So, she has been in a sleep regression, as they say.
Oh, yeah.
And,
you are
last
feeling
night she slept for 6 hours for the first time in weeks.
I was about to say, that's a win.
I'm hype. She slept.
That's a dub.
Yeah, it was huge. It's the only reason I'm semi-awake for this podcast this morning.
Well, tell your daughter I said thank you for sleeping 6 hours.
I will. As soon as I go inside and talk with her, I'm going to be like, hey, Lizzie, I know that you can't say dada or mama yet, but Drew's very happy that I made the podcast. So
exactly,
but it's been awesome.
Exactly.
She's been a lot of fun, and she's just so adorable.
Yeah,
you get it.
Dude.
You're a dad.
Yeah, dude. It's welcome to fatherhood. It's a good time. It's a stressful time. You like me had the I'm 30. I'm a dad. I need to rethink my entire life stress dream.
Yep, definitely. So how can I wake up in the morning and provide for my family while also not doing something that feels out of my wheelhouse, right?
Exactly.
That's what you start wondering.
Exactly. So no, yeah, dude, we are out here doing the thing. So I think I know you first and foremost. Well, I think first and foremost I knew you as Shama's other friend, Shama's other white friend that wasn't me or PD.
Yeah, or Chase. There's a lot of white friends.
Well, you were pre-Chase though.
That's true. I forgot about that. Then you know what?
I don't even want to talk about Chase. It was me, you, and PD, and then Chase came along.
Yeah, the third white guy. Who let that happen? You know.
And then Tony.
Oh yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Tony.
Yeah. It's we're slowly taking over from Shama, which might make us the villains of this story.
Yeah, I was
if we're
about to
not
say. I
too
think we're in the wrong here. But yeah, the first time I ever heard you was on the Church Stories podcast with him doing stuff, and then he connected me and you because he was like, Andrew does all my music and Jonathan makes really cool music, and like we just started talking, and we've never not talked since then.
Yeah, it's really insane because I met Shama because of meme pages, and like we just started talking. PD and I started talking before I really knew Shama, and they were doing the Church Stories podcast, and then I happened to be in town or like adjacent to them, and they were like, you should just come over and let's talk. And so the first time I met Shama and PD, I was in Shama's house, which feels like I could have been like a serial killer. And it was, I mean, not only that, but the first time I met Shama, it was like, nice to meet you. Now sit down and record this podcast for an hour and a half. So,
at a time where like podcasting was like not a normal thing to be doing on a regular basis. Like nowadays, I feel like it's pretty normal to be like, "Hi, nice to meet you. Let's have a really deep conversation about our feelings."
Yeah.
and then it was like, "What are we doing? We're sitting in a basement with some microphones on.
We're sitting in a spare room. That was where we were. It was like a studio storage room that we ended up in, and we recorded. So I guess if people want to hear me meet Shama for the first time, it is forever documented on the internet.
It is.
And then I was on it like 10 more times. It was crazy. So
you came to you were on digitally at the studio, and then you came a couple times to the studio at the church and stuff.
Yeah, but it's that was definitely how we met, and then we talked like on and off for a little while, and then last year we were just like, let's sit down and have coffee and like hang out in the studio, and it was awesome. We had a good time.
Yeah,
so
it was super fun.
I think about it all the time.
I think about it all the time. But yeah, no, there's so maybe on the music side, try to explain to people what you do musically.
Yeah. Well, I think where it kind of lands now is like the independent Christian space, right? Like there's a lot of categories of Christian music, Christian hip hop, CCM, Christian worship, all of that. But then there's just this portion of it that I think you and I both have like more of an affinity for, which is just the independent groups of people or the independent artists that are sitting down and just trying to make something different than what is being milled out repeatedly or like, radio friendly, things like that. And I just started falling in love with that kind of music, and in the meantime was starting to listen to more music that was experimenting with ideas and sounds and, textures and soundscapes, all of the fun little trigger words there. And I started thinking, man, I just want to make that, right? And kind of started venturing a little bit into like the indie pop kind of 80s influence stuff for a little bit, and then just released like a short like project here where I ventured more into like the storytelling aspects of not just writing from my own mentality, but writing about the stories of like historical Christians or people in the Bible. And I just sat down and was like, I want to write something that is unique, and I want the music to be unique. I want to take a lot of time on it. And so sat down, experimented with different ideas and sounds, and came up with this 7-track thing that is like independent Christian music with a folk indie pop flair to it. Does that all make sense?
No, yeah. Folk pop.
Yeah, folk pop. There it is.
Yeah. That's it's very cool. It's really funny because I think you started experimenting in that, and then I think I texted you, and I was like, dude, I've been really looking at this thing. Yes. And you were like, yeah, I've like been making that like pretty consistently like now at this point, and I just haven't released any of it yet. And I was like, that's so sick.
It's such a fun space to be in because like I think a lot of people like our age, in their early 30s, which is still weird to say, but in our early 30s, we got to experience like pop punk music. We got to experience, rock, then hip hop influence like continuing to grow into production. Then of course the creation of like lo-fi beats that kind of came into everything. And then we also got things like Mumford and Sons and the Lumineers and like all of these different people that sprung up out of just folk music and acoustic music and more driven that way. And so now I think we're really getting at a time where that all of that is starting to blend into what people are making. And at least that's what I was thinking about was I'm like sitting down and like remembering things from like a Bleachers album that I'm like, oh, I would love to try something like that. Meanwhile, I'm playing like a rubber bridge guitar, it's like very different sides of music.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it's always been the combination of like, I've really been into just like mountain. I mean, maybe it just comes from like being in old church, but you kind of like lean into like mountain man music a little bit, where it's like, dobros are cool.
Yep.
And like,
dude, give me a good hammer dulcimer, right?
Yeah,
like,
hammer dulcimer.
Dude.
Yeah, dude, exactly. And it's like, you look at bands like Nickel Creek and Punch Brothers and like some of those.
You're speaking. I've got a signed Chris Thiele ticket back here on my wall.
Oh, dude, that's sick. So we went to see Chris Thiele at the beginning of November. Actually, he did a series. He was in Greensboro actually, and did a series where he was playing with an orchestra.
Dang, man!
And like it wasn't recorded.
I didn't see that.
It wasn't recorded or anything. It was just like a one thing that he just did. It was very sick, but yeah, it was really cool. But like that influence, and then like other influences that Fleet Foxes and that some more newer stuff, that kind of stuff is been pretty consistent. It's like one of the few types of music that my wife like is a diehard fan of, and it's like, and I also love this kind of music personally. And like I said, it comes from old church stuff where it's like everything feels like an old church, like down home in a small town kind of deal. And I feel like there's something about exactly. There's something about taking that sound and then like plopping it into modern production and completely destroying what's cool about it.
Yeah. What if I dismantled this entire beautiful thing and ruined it? Yeah. So it's interesting you say this because my wife she loves like Americana and folk music, and I do too, but I also she and I are just different in how we consume music. And I think you'll understand this just because of the fact that you're a producer, you songwrite, like all of that stuff. It gets to a certain point where consuming music just changes, right? Like you start listening to it a different way than like the average consumer. And that sounds so pick me to say, right? Like to be like, oh, I'm just not like the other fellas,
But no, there's literally been instances where I'm listening to a song and I go, oh, that was really cool. And she's like, you got to stop talking while I'm listening to the song.
Well, okay. So like, what was the song Ceilings, right? That went crazy on TikTok a while ago. Why am I blanking on her name right now? Dude, what is wrong with me? I can't remember it. I'm going to pull it up here. We're going to listen to it. No.
Just completely demolished.
I take over. Lizzie McAlpine. There it is.
Lizzie McAlpine, yeah.
That song, my wife was listening to it. We listened to it in the car. And I just sat there and I was like, Kristen, this almost made me cry. Like the production on it. And for her, she's like, I don't know that I'm paying that much attention to the production. What do you mean? And so then we listened to it again, and I'm talking about like, oh my goodness, there's like an upright bass sound that comes in on the second verse. And then like as it builds, like the percussion is shifting and there's like all of this atmosphere. And then the song ends what feels like almost too early. but they give you just so much of the song in such a short amount of time that you're like, that song's beautiful. And I love that. I love that song. And so it's just a fascinating time to listen to music. But we just consume it differently. Like my wife will be listening to the same Avett Brothers album that she's been listening to for years. And I'll be like, hey, we're going from Talking Heads to Bleachers to, Steep Canyon Rangers now. Like it's all over the place.
Wow. It's funny also because I've been filling in on bass with a buddy of mine named James Tucker, who's like a country Americana folk artist.
Very nice.
And we played with a guy named Dylan Gossett, and who's kind of gotten some popularity on TikTok lately. And we did a bunch of, I talked about it on the podcast before, but we did a bunch of like sold out 2,000 cap rooms the last like couple weeks.
That's so exciting.
It's been super sick. We got to play the Ryman in Nashville.
Dude, I know, and I texted you right away.
Yeah, you did.
Was like, what is happening in life right now, dude? Like,
yeah, you're like, what?
It had been a minute since I texted you, and then the next thing I know, you're playing the Ryman, and I'm like, hold up, I've missed a whole chapter of this book.
No, it was a yes that I gave like 2 months before, and he was like, here's the run, and I was like, oh, so it's like a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't realize it was that big of a deal.
The ride was wild, dude. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy, and it also came on the heels of the hurricane, which also sucked. So it was like hurricane, recover week, 2 weeks of tour.
Yeah. No big deal, right?
No,
like
it's whatever.
The hurricane definitely impacted everything around you, but
it
like,
didn't
what if
destroy,
I left town for a while?
Didn't destroy homes and flood half the city, but whatever.
Man.
So the because of that, I've been listening to a ton of like newer country that's been very like folk Americana inspired.
Dude,
which is like I love it so much, dude. Dylan is one of those people. James, the guy that I play with, is one of those people. It's like old Hank Williams stuff and like Travis Tritt stuff and like
Well, and country music took that like anthem rock twist for it's not even rock, anthem pop twist for a while.
Yeah, and it's still kind of there. Like the rock stuff is very much there, like the Nickelback sound.
That Nickelback sound, but then there was also like just the weird, you could tell it was they wrote it to get like a crowd hype versus like just sitting down and writing like a country song. And that phase of country music was like, I couldn't take it. I was like, I cannot listen to this.
Yeah.
But now as I've started to see some of this shift that's going back more into like the singer-songwriter form of country music.
You're Tyler Childers of the world. Dude. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, I'm totally in with this. And I'm having to move past my initial aversion to country music that was formulated from this weird phase of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's even things like, I listened through the freaking Yodel Walmart kid. He's like 18 now and dropped an album. Did you hear it?
No, I haven't listened to it yet.
It's not bad. It feels old school, and it's one of those things where he's an 18-year-old kid, who just wrote and made this album that feels like something that would have come out in the 60s and 70s. Like,
wow. So like really old.
Dude, yeah, it's like
Willie Nelson era.
Oh, dude, yeah, like straight up. There's one single from it that was kind of the lead single. I didn't even know it was the kid the first time I heard it, because I was like, what is this? This is like so old sounding.
Yeah.
And then I realized it's the kid from the Yodeling Walmart video from years ago. Blew my mind. And so I wish him all the success, because that's a super interesting thing.
What a weird trajectory also.
Yeah, I mean, it's less yodeling than you would anticipate on the album.
Yeah, but like from meme to like country star is crazy.
I do feel like that would be really hard to overcome. You hear about people getting pigeonholed into like, oh, that's this person, they did this.
Yeah.
And I do feel like being a viral, sensation as a child, and then trying to be taken seriously by like the industry would be kind of tough. So he seems to have done it decently because he just took so much time between to, I guess, grow up. So,
Yeah, and I'm about to say he kind of disappeared for a while, like no one knew where he was, and
I guess he was in school.
Yeah, I guess so. That's hilarious. And I like Sturgill Simpson is another good example of that from like a newer like more country-fied era of like, but he's making country from like the 80s basically.
Yep.
It all feels like very old 70s and 80s country of like, this is just good songwriting, good storytelling, and just some banging like chord progressions.
Dude, and you know, I haven't listened to a ton of like Noah Kahan, right? Like I've listened to,
who's probably the most like pop folk thing that you have right now, to be honest.
Definitely. But when I first started hearing his stuff floating around and seeing clips live and stuff like that, I told Kristen, I was like, I think this is Gen Z's Mumford. Like they're awakening to this idea even more because of this guy who's kind of bridging a gap.
100%.
Because Mumford & Sons kind of did that, I think, for our age range, where like I wasn't listening to a ton of folk music until someone showed me like the Sigh No More album.
Yeah.
And then at that point it felt like just the industry was full of people doing this style now. And then Mumford switched genres. You know, it was just they pivoted away from it. But I don't know. It's really fascinating to think through like inspirations and how they influence what you create down the road. Because even when I would sit down and was like working on this project, I'm thinking about like, obviously Mumford & Sons stuff, but I'm also thinking about Fleet Foxes. I'm thinking about freaking Reliant K's Forget and Not Slow Down album. I'm thinking about like all of this stuff. And it combines into something that isn't any of those things still, you know?
That's what how do you parse out all of your influences into like writing a really interesting song that doesn't feel too much of one influence than the other?
Man, oh dude, this so I think first of all, I agree with, I want to say that it might have been Ed Sheeran that said this in some interview I saw one time, but it's true, which is like, before you get clean water out of like a dirty spigot, you have to run the water for a while to get all the crap out of it, you know? And so I think it just comes from sitting down and almost obsessively writing and recording, no limits on it. There's stuff that I put out years ago that I'm so, like on Noise Trade, that I'm so thankful Noise Trade went away, because I was like, you took it with it. Like, you took my music with it, and I could not thank you enough, Noise Trade.
Somebody needed to burn it, and it wasn't going to be me. Yeah.
I was like, I've never been so happy to see a company go under in my life. Like, I couldn't remember my login. So there's that, where I think the more that you work out a muscle, the you start to notice tendencies you don't like about things that you do. And, you know, you should be your own worst critic. Like, I think people say that as a negative thing sometimes, but you really should be, because you know, I think, what you can be capable of, and your gut gets better at determining what should and shouldn't make it. So I say all of that because, when it comes to songwriting, with this album, I was like, I know my tendency is to rush. So what I need to force myself to do is not rush. Like, I just need to not put that pressure on myself. I need to be willing to sit down and take the time and leave songs, like walk away from them and come back to them weeks later. And the other portion was lyrically, when I would write a phrase, I would read it, and I would think, is that the first thing that I thought of? And if it was the first thing that I thought of, I deleted it. because I was like, there's got to be some other way that I can phrase this that isn't predictable even to myself.
Yeah.
So I just started writing, and sometimes simple stuff made it through, but it was because, there wasn't a way to say it. But just trying to force myself to work out muscles that I had not before, and kind of wound up fishing through the stuff that really I'm glad didn't make it. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is I wanted a 10-song album, but I also kept telling myself, like, I'm not going to force it. Like, I'm not going to write 7 songs that I feel really good about and then think, well, man, I got to like hammer 3 more songs out, because then you just end up forcing 3 songs that they weren't up to par with what you were hoping.
Sometimes that can be a good creative constraint, but most of the time I feel like it's negative. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, like, towards the end I had 6 and an idea of 1. Mm-hmm. And that idea of the 1 was just like floating and I couldn't figure it out. And so I sat down and I listened to, I was listening to so much music. I was creating playlists around sounds that I thought were interesting, whether or not they were in the same genre. And then eventually I just sat down at the piano and started messing around with it, and it came into shape, and it ended up being the intro to the album. And that one, I think, was like, if I had rushed it, I probably would have never ended up writing it. But I just kept the ideas stored, in both my brain, but also in my notes apps and written down, and didn't want to settle for like something that didn't feel like it fit, And so, I don't know, fishing through inspiration is weird, because it does feel like you're grabbing and taking things from people, but I think that's all creativity is a little bit of theft, and then realizing you can't perfectly duplicate it anyway.
Sure.
So
there's a reason one of the most popular books from like 3 years ago was "Steal Like an Artist," and like that's a very popular phrase. But no, I think you're right. I think you got to get all the bad songs out before you can get to the good songs. I think that was somewhat what Ed Sheeran said, and it's really like also, like you said, creating without constraints, at least up front, and being really critical of what you do like and what you don't like.
Yep.
Maybe sometimes there's a I think being self-aware enough to know when you're getting in your own way is like kind of tricky.
Dude, totally.
But at the same time, it's like, if you're ultimately making music for yourself to enjoy, why would you go for less than what you actually enjoy?
That's the other thing too, is like exactly what you just said. I wanted to make an album that I would want to sit down and listen to. Like, I think that sounds weird to say a lot of times, but like, if you don't enjoy making it and you don't enjoy the songs that ended up on it, then it's going to be really hard for you to convey passionately to people that they should listen to it, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I mean, that's why when you look at these interviews of people who've been doing this their whole life, I'm a huge like Brian Wilson fan. I think you and I have talked about this, but the album Pet Sounds is just so important to me. And when you watch him talk about that time in his life, it's both tragic, but at the same time, like, he so vividly remembers the mentality he was in and the way he was thinking of putting things together and why he was doing the things he was doing. And that's because it was something he enjoyed, because it was not anything like the surf music they had done. It was nothing like anything they were being told to do repeatedly by Capitol Records and by his own father as a manager. It was just something that he was like, I cannot get this idea out of my head. The rest of the Beach Boys go on tour. I'm staying in the studio with the Wrecking Crew team, and we're just going to create this thing. And the rest of the guys came back and were like, what the heck is this? Like, this is the weirdest, like, what is going on? And now it's considered like one of the best albums of all time. So
Yeah.
it was because he abandoned this idea of I need to make something that's going to appeal to everybody else, and instead was like, what do I feel like I can create and should create, and started just going crazy with it. So yeah, it's just maybe a lack of fear to a certain extent.
Or somebody said this. It's being willingly dumb enough to not know that it's fear, and just being like bullheaded enough to do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that could go rogue, of course, because sometimes you see stuff. I mean, I don't know how your world is, but my social media feed is sometimes some of the craziest, weirdest musician suggestions, and you watch it and you're like, you could have done with a little bit of fear. Like you could have used the fear for this.
You could have used, yeah. You needed to pull back a little bit, my man. Just a little bit.
Like you're making me scared, and I'm not you. Like you should go and do different stuff. But no, I don't know. This is a really simple thing, but like, I also feel like if you're a musician and you're trying to figure out what you want to do, you need to get like a good pair of headphones and like actively listen to albums, not just like passively, but throw on headphones and just sit and listen all the way through an album and pay attention, because that for me, I started trying to do that at night, where I would just lay down and put on like a pair of noise canceling headphones and listen through an album that I'd never listened through, or listen through an album I'd listened to a lot, but just trying to pay attention to it. And I think that helps you like pick up on things that you're like, dang, I wonder why they put that noise there, or I wonder why they chose that phrase.
Yeah, or what that noise is.
Yeah, like what is that? Like to even bring Pet Sounds back up, like the track "You Still Believe in Me," there's like this harp sound at the beginning. And for a long time, you're just like, what am I hearing? What is that instrument? Is it a dulcimer? Is it a harp? Well, it's Brian Wilson with bobby pins leaned over a grand piano, just plucking the strings with pins.
That's super sick.
It sounds awesome. If you haven't known that, you should listen to it, and you'll be like, that's so cool.
Yeah. No, that's sick. Yeah, I don't know. I think you have a very specific style to your writing, and I think, in my opinion, you do a very good job of like taking from a lot of places, but also like having something that is so specifically you.
Oh, dude, thank you. That's a relief.
Well, you're welcome. But also, it's impressive, because like I feel like not enough people do take the time, for good reason. We're in a age of speed and output based stuff. Me and my buddy Andrew Chapman last week on the podcast had a really interesting conversation about how like it's funny that the world we are talking about with like folk music and like Americana is like kind of the new thing that's becoming more prominent. And to me, that all feels very slow. And like the word of this year that I've seen more people talking about is slow. And like, it's funny that the music that's getting popular it's not necessarily slow in tempo, but it's just like slow in attitude.
Yeah.
Like it can still be fast. Like folk bluegrass music is super fast a lot of times, but it's like slow in living.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
And I feel like you releasing your record prior to right now is very interesting, because I feel like you tapped into that maybe even earlier than the general populace may have like tapped into that.
Maybe I have a hard time sticking with like one style.
Yeah,
because you
did the '80s thing real hard before you.
Oh, dude,
made the pivot.
let me tell you, and it was a good time. That's one of those things where I did that album, And it was pretty much like no acoustic on it. It was just synth heavy. I did 2 albums of really heavy synth, really heavy double tracking and choruses and guitar solos. It was so fun. And once I did that, I wrapped up the second album of it, and I was really happy lyrically with what it was, and I was happy with the end results of those. But I also was like, I don't know that this is like authentic to who I am as a person. You know, I'm not that indie rock 80s personality of like, let me
Synth
go out
pop
there and,
guy.
yeah, like I love it, but it's maybe not more of who I am. And so I am a person that sits down and I'm just going to play piano. I'm going to play an acoustic guitar in my house and just tinker with it. And so I kind of decided, let me limit myself to this. My friend Blake, who plays guitar on a lot of what I do, he and I started having conversations around, okay, how can we just completely shift how you use electric for this, you know, more slide, less reverbs, things like that.
Drier vocals.
Yeah, way drier vocals, dude. It was as one of those things where I was nervous to put out dry vocals because of how heavily reverbed I'd always done it. But, you know, just kind of like trying to shift and do something different that felt more authentic to what I consume and what I enjoy. And I grew up in like church, grew up in a small town where it's like country music heavy, folk music heavy. Grew up with hymns and storytelling and all this stuff. So that influence, I think, just has always come through my music, whether it was in that genre space or not. And so this time I thought, like, what if I lean all the way into it? And man, I'm really happy with how it turned out. Like, truthfully, it's my favorite thing I've ever done.
It's a great record. I listened through it whenever it came out, and I think I texted Shama. I was like, "Yo, Jonathan snapped." Jonathan snapped on this one, bro.
I think it surprised Shama too, because he had listened through, and then he was at my house. He was driving through, going on the way to like a show or something. Like he does show business. What is this?
Yeah, you know.
And he told me, he's just like, dude, like I listened through and it's crazy. And it's funny because it, for me, felt like I simplified, but in simplifying what I was doing, it allowed me to think more creatively about like melody and more creatively about like, if I'm simplifying, the space needs to be filled simply, but with something else that I'm not going to be doing normally. And so, a lot of times that ended up being acoustic and just like messing with sounds and, you know.
Well, like the way parts are played and like the orchestration of the parts in general changes a lot whenever you're like, oh, I have 5 tracks to do things with and it has to fill out X amount of space.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the intro track to the album was maybe one of the more complex in the whole situation. But even looking at that project, I did like a walkthrough on my YouTube of just the layers of it. It's still not the most layers that I've ever done in a song, but it felt like more because I just tried really hard to fill the space with something going on. And so it was a lot of fun putting it together. I say this about every time I do a project. I don't know if there's anything left in the chamber, but we'll see.
I think you'll do the thing that everybody does, which is you'll step away from it for a while, and and then you'll listen to an album. Like some album will come up, and you'll be like, "Oh, I have to write something right now." Like that's what happens to me every single time. I'll listen to something, and I'm like, "I need a guitar in my hands yesterday."
Yeah. What's an album for you that you feel like you heard it and you were like, man, like I've got to get my hands on like a guitar and do something.
Legitimately, there's a record called Salt.
Okay.
By it is by Half Moon Run.
Okay, I'm pulling this up for myself.
It is.
I already like that album art.
Yeah. this is from last year, from 2023. This was my favorite album of last year.
Man.
I think I found it, and then every person I've showed it to that's like into folk pop music is like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing ever.
Dang, I'm so excited to listen to that.
There's some songs that sound check out Alco first, the second song on the record.
Okay.
It's like they use like a baritone ukulele.
There we go.
Like
now we're talking.
a large grand and like a super compressed but lightly played drum kit and stuff. And it's like very live, but also not. And like they just take very different musical choices. They're from Quebec.
Okay.
So they're from Montreal, and like so they're French Canadian folk pop musicians. And so
wow.
All of their influences are very different, but also they pull from the same like stuff that we do as well, just like only half the time. And it's like, oh, this is a very different space that you're living in. And so there's like there's a song called Hotel in Memphis that reminds me of like piano rock Eagles songs.
Okay.
And like it's got like this blues upright piano kind of like dude,
I can't wait to listen to this. This sounds amazing.
It's one of not the last time, but like that's a record where I was like, the first time I listened to it, I listened to the whole thing and I was like, this is amazing. Not only is the record perfect, production's really good, mix is amazing, but it's just like very well constructed and well written. That's probably a more recent one, or from last year. Something from this year, if I were to give somebody in like you talking about in general or like in the folk pop thing?
Dude, I'm just like an album that you just find to be creatively sparking, I guess would be the term.
So, Red Clay Strays put out a record. I don't know if you know who they are. They're like
I'm looking it up right now. The Red
country
Clay
band
Strays.
from Alabama. They have a song called Made by These Moments, and it literally sounds like to me it sounds like if the vocalist from Fleet Foxes was in an Eagles band.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Awesome.
It's really cool. The songwriting is fantastic on it. And then from like a very different mindset, Gillian Welch put out a record this year that was really good. Josiah Queen in the folk space is really, really good.
He's been killing too, man.
He has been killing. Good on him too. Shama put me on to him, and I was like,
he's
dude,
just doing
this
so
is
good,
so
man. It's cool to see. He's still, I think, 100% independent as well. Which
is
really impressive.
I think Shama was telling me it's like he keeps getting asks, and I don't think anybody's gonna be able to get him for a little bit.
Nah, I think
he's happy.
It seems like too a lot of people that get really truthfully, I'll tell you, like after I released 2 singles, I got contacted by a label that was like Capitol Records adjacent label.
Yeah.
And like works with them and does distribution and all that.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Hey, can we have a conversation with you? We're trying to find some people." And I was like, "Yeah, like let's talk. That would be cool." Have a conversation. We talked through it. I said, I'm interested-ish, I'm adjacent to being interested in this, but I need to see if it makes sense. And so they sent a deal, and the deal was basically, you need to put out an album in the year, and the split was wacky, and you start getting into this zone where you're like, okay, I think that you're just taking part of the stream revenue and part of the revenue in general for the idea of maybe getting on editorial playlists. And is that really worth it?
Which you can do yourself.
Yeah, you can do it yourself. And there's there's so many methods of stuff you can do independently. And so I ended up basically emailing back. It was like, hey, I appreciate the time. They had asked, they didn't want to be insulting with an offer. And I was like, I'm not insulted by an offer.
Yeah.
I just don't think it makes sense. And I think it's with guys like Josiah Queen who are just killing it right now. You know, why would he go and do this if he has a good manager who's helping him book things and he's got somebody helping him like with finances? You could do a whole lot just independently from a
100%.
full recording contract. So,
Dude, the guy James that I played with, fully independent, sold out, played a sold out Ryman show. So
wow, man, it's
crazy.
That's so awesome. That's
so, like, it's
good
possible.
for him, dude.
I
good
know
for you.
It's possible.
I mean,
technically, yeah, and I mean technically we were direct support, but like that's still big.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter. So all of those people I listed were like in the folk pop genre. The other things I've been into, there's an artist called Bill Murray I love.
Yeah. I am
dude,
familiar with Bill Murray, not the actor, but
love,
with the
no. Bilmuri.
Muri, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
American Motorsports.
I am familiar, but I need to listen.
It is if you took pop country music,
okay,
pop punk, and like gent heavy music, and put it all together. It's so good.
I just saved the 420cc edition.
Yes, that's what you need. That's what you need. I'm going to see him with some friends next year. I'm very excited about it. He's the old guitarist from Attack Attack.
No way.
Yeah.
That's
Johnny Frank.
Crazy, dude. Wow.
And he's gotten huge.
Wow. I did not know that. First of all, I haven't thought about Attack Attack in forever, at least since my rebellious phase, right?
Yeah.
I listen to scream music now, Mom. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, dude, that's crazy. I've got an album that I think is so fascinating that you should listen to.
Okay, yeah. Give me your album recs of like albums that have made you go, oh, I just got to make something right now.
Oh, dude. Well, I mean, I recently, not recently, but last year I started re-listening through, the live Stop Making Sense Talking Heads album. I don't know if you've ever watched or listened through it.
I haven't watched it.
Dude, it's on HBO. It's on Max, HBO Max, whatever you want to call it now.
Yeah.
Watching it, you're like, I've got to play with a band right now.
Yeah.
Like I've got to play with some people. They look like they're having so much fun. So that one made me really just think heavily about, what could I achieve actually live? But an album that genuinely I listen to all of the time is by a guy named Husky Gowinda. Are you familiar with Husky?
I am not.
The band?
No.
Okay. There's a band called Husky, and he was the lead singer of it, obviously. But his side stuff, Husky Gowinda is Gawenda. He's Australian folk music, and his album, The Rocket Ship is Haunted, is so fascinating to me. Especially the last track, The Astronaut. I listened to that song with headphones, and it feels like I just go to a different place, dude. Like, it is such a simply produced album, tons of nylon string just picking, but simple percussion, simple textures going on, like, but his writing and his melodies are just so interesting to me.
Yeah.
It's maybe leans a little like Beatles in some way, with his vocal portions, but it is very, very folk adjacent and chill. So I listen to that album almost religiously. It's crazy how much.
That's sick. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I just added it.
Dude, it's great. And then, I'm trying to think. Recently, listening through the 3 songs that Bon Iver released.
Dude, I haven't listened to it yet.
Dude, they're great. Those 3 songs are phenomenal. They're simple to a degree as well.
I keep forgetting to listen. I keep forgetting to listen to it.
Well, it's funny because the first track is literally just like a monotone beep, and you're like, that doesn't count as a song, does it?
Yeah. Justin Vernon can do what he wants.
He could get away with it. And I've never been like a huge Bon Iver listener. I liked his first couple of projects, and then as it got more experimental, I liked them, but not like a ton.
22 Million I thought was really cool, and I liked but it wasn't like, okay, so 22 Million was really cool from like a conceptual, like I'm just gonna try a bunch of stuff, but like it's not an album that I'm just gonna like put on to casually listen to.
Totally,
it's an album I'm gonna listen to and be like, what can I take away from this?
What is going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, these three new songs
however, is a little more like there's good song structure in a lot of these and those songs.
I would agree with that. I enjoyed that album more, and it did feel like it was actually, this sounds weird, it was actually songs on an album.
Yeah, versus like a dude like trying to be as experimental as possible.
Yeah, and so with these three songs he just released, they are very stripped back, and I love them.
Interesting.
Sable
so it's like
is
more akin to like the Bon Iver or Forema albums.
Dude, totally. I mean, and I would even argue they're even more simplified than those. Like, they are very stripped back. Vocal forward in the mix as well. Like, I mean, to the point where you're like, I can clearly understand every lyric he's singing.
It's probably intentional.
It is, and he's singing low. He's not singing like high falsetto.
Like he normally does, yeah.
Dude, yeah. So I listened to those three songs, and I thought, man, I probably will continue to listen to this album, and it will make me want to write again. So,
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. You'll find something like that'll happen, and you'll be like, dang, I have to pick up a guitar right now and write at least one song.
Yeah.
Or what happens for me is I listen to a lot of podcasts as well as do a lot of podcasts, and it's like when I'm listening to people talk about like life or business or self-development or whatever, and they say a thing, and I'm like, that's a great song lyric, and I like write that down.
Yes. I have a
or they provide like a framework or a structure, and I'm like, I'm gonna write a song about like this kind of thing. That's a really cool idea. Yeah.
I have a buddy of mine that he his producer is Gable Price. Like, he does all the production and stuff. And at one point, Gable did like a Zoom call where he's like, yeah, just invite some people and we'll like all hop on a Zoom call and we'll talk about songwriting. And so I hopped on that Zoom call. And one of the things that that he said in that I started doing that was super helpful was, if you think of a lyric idea, like just have a pinned note in your phone and write it down, and then put the number of syllables next to it, like however many syllables are in that sentence. And I labeled mine detention, because I was like, I have an education degree and I'm putting these lyrics in detention. So you do that. And if it didn't turn into a song within like a month or so, or next time you check it, then you move it down into like a up for grabs portion of the note, basically.
Okay.
And so there were times where I was like, I can't figure out a lyric. I need something that has like 7 syllables. And I would go into that note and I would look and be like, oh, this one kind of fits, but like I need to adjust it to be topically what it should be for the song. But that was such a good songwriting tip that now whenever I hear something, on a podcast or a sermon or whatever, I'm like, that could be a lyric. I'll throw it in that note in case I need it later. So
nice. That's a great idea.
I love it. Yeah, it's actually very addicting to do. So
yeah. So moving into like some other things that you do, Mr. Renaissance Man, you also are in the content space and doing that kind of stuff. I would love to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's super fun that you're like,
let's do it.
You do the songwriting stuff and you do all that stuff, but like now you're really doing a foray into like content proper. And it's going to be somewhat music related sometimes, but also not music related sometimes. Which is
trust
like
me, I'm trying to figure that one out too.
Yeah, which is I think cool. I think you're kind of doing the thing where it's like, I'm gonna make a bunch of stuff that I think is cool, and then if people want to subscribe to like watch me talk about random stuff, like that's the channel basically.
Yeah, I mean that's a really accurate way of putting it, and truthfully, here's what's really hard to explain to people, because I did music so heavily, and that was all that I was promoting, all I was talking about.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it was just like, hey, I'm done with the album. By the way, YouTube is happening. And it has been happening for like a year or so. But I did video stuff first when I was growing up. I bootlegged a copy of Sony Vegas Movie Studio onto an Acer laptop that I had.
Yes, sir.
And I had a friend of mine, Christian, that he and I are still really, really close friends. And we just went out and we filmed stuff like with the crappiest cameras we could find. I mean, we were learning how to do like green screening and trying to do visual effects, how to add muzzle flashes to like these weird airsoft guns we had, and like how to, I mean, we were doing the most outrageous stuff, and just, I loved doing video content. And then growing up in church, going into youth group, we would make the youth pastor, who I actually am getting lunch with today, he and I are still really close. He was like, guys, I need like announcement videos. Like, do you guys want to make videos for church? And so we started making like, the dumbest youth group videos, and they loved them. And we loved doing it. And then we got more friends involved. So video was always just like a very important thing that I loved doing, is just creating something fun. And to a certain degree, it's what I still really love doing, even with music content. Is like, oh, I created an album, but man, I want to have like a fun video idea for this. Like, the content around it was what was like addicting too. And so, back like a year and a half ago, I resigned as youth pastor at the church that I attend, and was kind of like, okay, I'm working a normal job. Like, I'm done with doing ministry, but now I need a different outlet. And so talked with Shama about this very stupid idea I had, which was, what if I made a YouTube video where I would listen to nothing but K-Love Radio for a week and like documented myself going crazy. And he was so encouraging. He was like, you've got to do it now. Like, you've spoken it out there. Like, you've got to actually follow through. He's like, because I want to see it. Yeah. And thankfully that thing like suddenly was like 20,000 views in a week after I put it out. And it was such a jump start, because I immediately went from like 30 subscribers on a YouTube channel to 1,000 and monetized. And at that point you're like, oh, maybe I should do something again. And so I started making another video, and that suddenly was monetized too. And you just start snowballing. And I kind of fell in love with video all over again. Because I had been doing editing for the church, editing freelance, and suddenly just bringing it back to like, I'm going to create something that I find enjoyable, it's just been so fun. And I'm having a blast doing it, dude. It's crazy to say that I'm doing it regularly and like have resigned a full-time job to continue doing it. Like, it's insanity.
No, that's nuts. And on top of that, it's like you're doing a series now talking about called Strange Scrolls, which is amazing. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, part of it is like, playing the YouTube game. You and I talked about this a little bit before recording.
Whoa.
There's the side of YouTube where regular content is king, right?
Yeah.
Like predictability. YouTube wants to be able to predict who to push your video to. And I mean, a lot of people act like YouTube doesn't want to push their videos, and it's like, no, they really actively do, because they want people staying on the platform. They just want to find the right viewer for your video, and they're out there. It's so many users. And so part of it came from like having a Patreon and talking with people there and saying like, what do you guys think about regular content? Like, what would that look like? Kind of brainstorming with the patrons, which was amazing to be able to do. And simplifying my setup a little bit to where I could just like roll when we're ready to go. Yeah. And storing up and writing ideas for a couple of months to be like, do I have the not only bandwidth to do it, but do I have the concepts to follow through with it? And so,
and same as songwriting, getting the bad ideas out, dude, like early on.
Yeah, like I've had some stinker videos out there, trust me. Like you just get it out. And it ended up that this idea of this weekly show formatted, because I was thinking, well, I need to do something regularly, like that's predictable for YouTube, that's similar to the content that I know the audience on YouTube for me likes, but something where it's maybe more conversational. So my YouTube feed, my TikTok feed, my Instagram feeds are crazy. I get the dumbest and strangest suggestions on there, and I love it. And as they say in the comments, like, I built this algorithm brick by brick. Like, yeah. Like I put work into getting my Instagram this weird. And so I thought it would be really fun to start talking about just the random things that have floated across my feeds or whatever is fascinating me, and just diving deep into it. And so, like, one of the things I kept getting targeted ads for was like Ancestry and 23andMe stuff. And I thought, you know what? Like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to test my DNA. I'm going to see what I am. And we're just going to talk about that. And people loved it. And so then this week was like weird church shows as kids. And that was awesome. It's been so fun.
Even before that, you did one before it was Strange Scrolls, talking about Kevin Tierney just being everywhere.
Dude, Kevin Tierney. I love that guy. I see him on my feed. And that was, I think, kind of a tester for the Strange Scrolls idea. And I saw it was received decently and thought, man, I can talk about a lot right now. Like, if I can talk about Kevin Tierney, I can talk about anything I want.
For sure. People will watch weird stuff.
Oh, man. But it's really fun because one thing that I told my wife was, I think a lot of times people that are doing creative stuff, they have multiple things they're interested in. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be this like lie that floats out there where it's like you have to pick one. Like, you can only do one of these things and you have to do that completely. And maybe sometimes, right? Like, you don't want to spread it too thin.
Sure.
But at the same time, like, I really love making YouTube videos now, and I really love songwriting. And so I'm going to do both of those things, right?
Yeah. But hey, and if you can do both
smart
of those,
about it, but
if you can do both of those things and pay your bills, what a better what's better, dude?
Look, like I said earlier, like, I was sitting on my couch yesterday and I was editing reels for a band that I know, and the band Hopeful, and they've brought me on to kind of like just edit their content and their footage. And I'm sitting on my couch putting it together, essentially building a live music video.
Yeah.
And I'm at one point just stop and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, the fact that I was like selling phones and like doing fine, like working with businesses, and then like a couple of weeks later, like, I'm sitting on my couch and getting paid to edit something that I already would have had fun editing is insanity, right? Like, that's the craziness of life. Dude. But sometimes you just gotta jump off the cliff without a parachute and try to land in the trees. So that's what I did.
Jonathan Wright, everybody. Jonathan, if you want people to check you out or see your craziness,
I don't know about if I want them checking me out. I'm taken.
Yeah,
but,
I mean.
Stop looking at me this way.
Yeah, if they want to find and follow you, where would you like to send them?
Oh man, that's another great question. At Jonathan A. Wright on Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff. My music and my YouTube are under Jonathan Allen Wright.
I think it's also at Jonathan A. Wright on YouTube as well.
Oh, that's right. I did get that. I forgot. I'm trying to be consistent,
Yeah.
And I will tell you a fun thing before we hop off.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe I've told you the story, but I never planned to use my middle name for anything I was doing because it was just so long. But back in the day when I was on Noise Trade, I went to release something and they were like, hey, the artist named Jonathan Wright is already taken. And I go to look for who it is, and it was a guy that had written a really dark album, and it was like a noose on the album art, and it was really intense.
Yeah.
And so I ended up adding my middle name because I kept having people I knew that were like, hey, we tried to listen to your music, and like, is it the one with the noose on it? And I was like, no, that's like, that is not me.
That's not
so
me.
I had to differentiate it, and now I've been stuck with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jonathan Allen Wright, that's how you can find me.
Yeah, on all those socials, go check him out.
All
go,
over the place.
Check out Strange Scrolls on YouTube, or if you're an audio listener,
That's right.
it is on podcast platforms if you want to check it out there
Yeah.
and listen to it while you do your long drives to work.
That's right. I try to keep it like 15 minutes, so it's, I think, like a good commute listen. You know?
There you go. So
That's what
yeah,
I'm talking about.
if you want to go check that out, go check him out. Jonathan, I appreciate you coming and hanging out with me, man. It's been a long time coming.
Dude, this was awesome. We need to hang out in person here soon and grab some coffee again.
100%.
Dude, thanks for having me. This was great.
Dude, thank you so much for coming. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. Go follow Jonathan on all the socials. Make sure you like and subscribe while you're here, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast. If you could take the time to like, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other audio platform, go ahead and make sure you're subscribed, and also leave a rating and a review. It helps the show get out to new people, and we're trying to grow every single week. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, and we'll see you next week.